Hey guys, Ryan here for Bender Wins, and today I'm going to be talking about the impact of weather in sports. So, Mother Nature is a huge deciding factor in a lot of games, especially football and baseball. Not so much hockey, although there are some outdoor games now. But today we're going to be mostly talking about baseball. Obviously, there's a lot of correlations with weather in football as well, but today we're going to focus on baseball for example reasons. Um, Next to pitching in baseball matchups, weather is probably the most important factor in determining over-unders. So, in a lot of cases, I would actually say that weather is more important because the lines are often adjusted for pitching matchups. So, if you have a lopsided pitching matchup, um, lopsided in the sense where there's two really strong pitchers, you're going to have a really low line. You might have a 7 or 7.5. If you have two, inexperienced or poor pitchers, you're going to have a high line, maybe 10, 11, 11 and a half even. But baseball, the lines aren't adjusted enough for weather. And that's because the public, for the most part, doesn't take into account. For the sharps, it can be the first thing they look at in determining where they're going to find value in their games. It's important to know that geographic areas play a large role in it, and certain stadiums. So obviously, there's under stadiums where Tampa Bay can be right conditions can be a really good under stadium. Colorado, obviously, most people are aware at this point, it's a pretty good over stadium, especially later in the summer. And I'll tell you guys why in a few minutes, why it's good later in the summer and not so much earlier in the year. And Chicago, Wrigley Field can actually be both. Wrigley Field is one of those anomalies where it can be a good over stadium or it can be a good under stadium, and it can be both depending on weather conditions. So I'm gonna start with an example here of I'll use Wrigley Stadium for an example. So here's a statistic: when the wind is blowing in at Wrigley, so that means in towards the batter at between 5 and 16 miles per hour, and both teams unders have come in at over 50% in the last 10 games. So that means two teams where their offenses might have been faltering a little bit. But in this case, the most important thing is wind blowing in. So we have the wind blowing in from straightaway center towards home plate at 5 to 16 miles an hour. The two teams playing each other have gone under in over 50% of the games in their last 10. That comes in at 64.1% going back to 2008. So every time that happens going back to 2008, you would win 64.1% of the time. So this is a huge advantage that weather's giving you in these games. Vegas knows this. Vegas sets these lines to trap the public, to basically make the public bet the over in these games. You might have poor pitching matchups, and you might see a line at 7.5, most likely 8 to 8.5, and it looks great. I mean, you really want to bet the over, but the sharps are on the under because they know it comes in. If you put $100 on every single one of those games, just $100 on every single one of those games, going back 11 years to 2008, you'd be up $7,294. So I'm just using this as one example to show the impact of weather. So what kind of things do you want to look for when you're trying to figure out, what's going to be an advantage and what isn't? So obviously wind is a huge advantage. Not just the direction, but the speed as well. You'd want to look at, if wind is blowing in, generally it's going to be advantageous to the under. If it's blowing out, it's going to be more of an advantage to the over. I mean, that goes without saying. Depending which field it's blowing to, you might want to look at the dimensions of the ballpark. So, if it has a short porch in right and the wind is blowing strong out to right field, that could be an advantage, especially, if you have a lot of right-handed hitters, right? So it's important to look at. The other thing that gets overlooked a lot by just average sports bettors and professional sports bettors look at is something called ADI. It's an air density index, okay? So I'm not a meteorologist, but I look at this probably just as much as a meteorologist would. Because An air density index is exactly what it says. It's how dense the air is. Okay, that's how thick and how heavy the air is in any one area. So the reason why there's so many overs in Colorado is Colorado typically has a really, really good air density index for a ball to travel. So what the air density index is it's a measurement of elevation, where Colorado happens to be a very high elevation, meaning the air is thin. It's going to measure temperatures. So I talked about overs in Colorado late in the summer. So here's a combination that you're going to get. When the air is hot, or the days are hot, the air becomes very thin and the ball travels further. Games in early in the year in Seattle, where it's a much denser, heavier air, a ball that is hit might travel 270 feet, 280 feet. It's going to stay in the ballpark. In Colorado, with the thin air late in the summer, so not only is it a hot day, but the air is really, really thin, meaning there's not a lot of resistance on that ball when it's hit. No resistance to stop it from traveling. So that ball that was hit 270 feet, now it might be 340 feet and just drop in over one of the fences there. So there's a huge advantage to understanding the air density index. You can actually, there's a lot of sites, but there's a few online anyways that are really simple to use, and you can look up geographically by zip code the air density index at any stadium, and you can use that to determine whether you have an advantage on an over and under. Now, it's not good enough just to say, okay, the air density index is really high, so I'm going to bet that game. You're using this as a tool, as one piece of information to make a bet. So I'll give you an example of something that might be really advantageous. So I talked earlier about Wrigley Field. Okay, so we'll say we have that scenario set up for us where basically, again, the wind is blowing in at, I had to write it down. The wind is blowing in at 5 to 16 miles an hour. So it's not a crazy wind, but it's noticeable. The teams have gone under more than 50% of the time in their last 10 games. That's both teams. And we're going to add to that maybe we have an under umpire. So I've talked in earlier videos about having over and under umpires. Another very important thing to look at. But let's say we have an under umpire. An under umpire being someone that's going to basically their games go under more than 50% of the time. Under more than 55% of the time. Sorry, guys. If it's less than 55, if it's 52, 51, I don't consider that to be an under umpire. That's just variance, we'll call it. So if you couple these two things together, now you have a powerful bet. One way that you can kind of check these is in a lot of these cases when you have this, the perfect storm of awesome, we'll call it, where you have a scenario where you're going to be hitting at 64.1% regardless of umpire. But now you couple it by having an under umpire. Umpire maybe 57% unders. Typically what you're going to find in these situations, guys, for the most part, is you're going to find heavy betting from the public on the over in those games. And that's because Vegas is going to set that line low. They know that this number is going to hit 64+% of the time, and with those under umpires, probably closer to 66, 67%, which is huge. So Vegas doesn't mind setting a lower line, trying to draw that money onto the over. So by looking at these combination of things and also looking at where the public's betting, with those three things all lining up, you can be pretty sure you found some really good value in the bets, guys. So that's just a little insight. I'll do some more videos on weather. We got NFL coming up, so I'll talk a little bit about how weather affects NFL over-unders and run game versus passing in later video. But again, guys, thank you very much. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to ask a comment down in the section. As always, guys, I'm going to ask if you could subscribe and like. It really does help just getting started out with this, guys. And hopefully you want to see some more videos. So anyways, drop a like, guys. Thank you very much. And as always, good luck.